Okay, part two. Wow, part two of all of the stuff. I didn't even say adios at the end of the last part. I know, my bad. Don't worry about it. Alright, this is literally like 20 seconds after that. I'm going to post these videos at the same time, hopefully. So, we went over, in part one, we went over, what was it? Surviving stuff, right? The different types of surviving via health tanking with different armor, damage reduction, overguard, damage immunity, shield gating, overguard gating, and all of the sorts. And before that, we went over the different pillars of what you would want in a build and places to get them, specifically grouping as well, right? All the different ways of grouping. So the next thing on the agenda is going to be armor strip, I guess. Might as well go into armor strip. This won't be too long of a one. Armor strip's pretty simple. It's not nearly as important as it was before, Jade Shadows, but it is still valuable. And you still want a full armor strip, okay? If you can get it, but you don't need it. Now, enemies have a cap of 2700 armor, which gives them 90% damage reduction. The formula for damage reduction on armor is like, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's supposed to be the armor value multiplied by 3, and then you get this, you take the square root of whatever the number you get from that is, right? So like, for example, 2,700 armor multiplied by 3 is 8,100. The square root of 8,100 is 90. 90% damage reduction from 2,700 armor. That is the formula for calculating the damage reduction. Which is why if you strip 98% of an enemy's armor, like let's say Corrosive, okay, Corrosive normally strips 80% of the enemy's armor when you are at max stacks. If you have an Emerald Archon shard, you can add 2 or 3, depending on the rank of the shard, extra corrosive stacks as the cap for them, right? So if I'm using 2 normals for plus 4, 14, each extra stack gives another 5%, right? No, 6% damage, or not damage, sorry, I'm stuttering so bad. Each extra stack past 10 gives another 6% extra armor reduction. Meaning if I have 2 normal greens for corrosive stacks, I can get to 14, which is a 100% armor strip. Technically, it's 104, but it doesn't matter past 100. But with 1 Tau Forged, which is 3 corrosive stacks, I get 98% armor strip. Now, that extra 2% does actually end up mattering. That 2% armor, so let's say 2% of an enemy with 2,700 armor, which is what most enemies will have.
First impression.
Wow, sorry about that sound. My phone started playing a video. What the fuck? I just wanted to grab the calculator real quick. So if an enemy has 2,700 armor, which will be most enemies in the end game, past like level 500, you take that value and you reduce it by 98%, okay, right? So that's super simple. That ends up being 54, I think, right? It should be 54. 2%, 1% of 2,700 is 27. Yeah, so you get 27 plus 27, that's 54. 54 multiplied by 3 gives you 162. And the square root of 162 is, let's see, square roots. Fuck. It should be 12.5 or something like that. The square root of 162, yes, is 12.7279220611357, right? So just under 13%. So if I'm dealing 13% less damage to an enemy, right, that brings me down to 80% of my damage is dealt. Which means to go back up to 100% of my damage dealt, right, so 10% would be 8.7% more damage, which would put me at 95. Yeah, that means you end up getting, what, 16% higher damage by stripping that last 2% of armor. Now, that's not a huge amount, but like 15, 16% extra damage can be very nice. Think about that. Like, if you can easily apply the extra strips, that means you will overall get a 16% damage increase to all of your damage to enemies you fully strip if you have the extra shard to be able to full strip, right? If you have 2 normals instead of just 1 Tau. So, full armor stripping is still valuable. It's not required, though. You are just fine stripping only even half of an enemy's armor. The more armor strip, the better, but you don't have to full armor strip, okay? I just want to make that very clear. But if you can manage it, it can be nice, just not needed. So the different ways of armor stripping, of course, would be corrosive is the first one. Corrosive applies 26% armor strip on the first proc of corrosive, right? 26%. Every subsequent proc of corrosive will strip armor by another 6%. So it caps out at 10 corrosive procs, which ends up being an 80% armor strip, which is why each extra stack from Emerald Archon shards will be another 6%, which is why, 1 Tau Forged means 90%, 98% armor strip, and 2 normals can give you 100%. There is a problem with that, though, which be some enemies are immune, or not immune necessarily, but, well, yeah, there are some bosses immune to armor strip, but those bosses usually can't be armor stripped regardless by anything. But there are enemies such as Acolytes, or different boss-type enemies, like, I think, Vor doesn't count for that. But different boss-type enemies and rogue necromechs and stuff that cannot go past 4 status procs. However, they are affected by by Emerald Archon shards. So let's say you had, 3, 4 Emerald Archon shards for extra corrosive procs, and you could get 14 on an Acolyte. You could full strip them with corrosive. That's not really worth it, but I just wanted to, say that that's a thing. But there are several other ways of stripping armor. One of them would be, where is it? A melee mod called Shattering Impact. Impact damage, not the impact status effect, but dealing damage that deals impact damage in a hit, reduces enemy armor by 6. Now, 6 isn't a lot when enemies have 2700 armor at max, so you're going to need a lot of hits, but that is an option. Another option would be if you have Argonac and the Amalgam Argonac mod, it makes it so damage from daggers reduces armor by 6. Now, what makes this nice is, now you'll be like, oh, 6, that's the same as Shattering Impact, so that's worthless. No. See, this, unlike Shattering Impact, also applies via status procs and DOTs of the sorts. So if you have electric or gas and you melee influence on a dagger and hit everything, you can armor strip unbelievably fast. So if you were to use this and then you used a dagger, literally any dagger, and you run like a melee influence, again, like I said, melee influence, electricity, and then like electric, blast, gas, anything like that to hit as many enemies as possible, you can armor strip very, very quickly. And that does work on enemies such as like Acolytes. Now, what's nice about this, or Shattering Impact, is the armor strip is permanent. Corrosive only strips their armor while it's on them. I think it has like an 8-second base duration. So when the corrosive runs out, they regain their armor. Now, other ways of armor stripping, like abilities. Some abilities do it. You can apply corrosive with Hydroid. His passive, though, makes it so the first proc of corrosive strips 50% armor. Meaning max corrosive fully strips enemy armor with Hydroid without any green shards. Or, you can armor strip with like Bastille on Vauban, Pillage, right? There's a bunch of different armor strips, so we'll go over the Helmut's armor strips real quick. There is, let us see, so I can like talk about what they do. Fire Blast, this, despite it showing it strips, oh no, it does show, oh no, it says 75%. I think this might only strip 50% on cast, because the stats reflected actually change once you put it on a frame, which is kind of wonky. So, you know what? just for the sake of showing you, I'm going to spend some resources and slap Fire Blast onto Wisp real quick so that you can see. Fire Blast is an armor strip, and it is a permanent armor strip, and it also applies heat. Oh yes, I forgot to talk about heat, because heat also is an armor strip. Heat damage strips 10% of enemy armor every time it ticks a DOT proc of the heat DOT, which ticks once a second, meaning over 5 seconds it strips 50% armor, and that is the cap. So in 5 seconds of heat procs, it will strip half of the enemy's armor. Now that is of their current armor, meaning if you have corrosive and no Emerald Archon shards and it strips 80%, and then you heat, it won't strip the rest of the 20, it'll strip 50% of the remaining 20%, putting the enemy at 10% armor. It is additive to corrosive, which is unfortunate. Whereas abilities, it's multiplicative to corrosive. I had to correct myself. Abilities, on the other hand, or at least all of the ones that I know of, I believe, are additive in their armor stripping, which is why if you strip 50% and then you do another ability that strips another 50%, that strips all of their armor. So, Fire Blast. Here we go. Fire Blast. Oh yeah, it strips 75% armor from the enemy. However, that does not scale with strength, which is highly unfortunate. But that doesn't mean if you go with a negative strength build, you can fix that. This does cost a lot of energy though, because you have no immolation meter on every other frame, so it's going to be 75 energy per cast, so it's not really worth it. But it also applies heat, so it strips 75%, putting them at 25, and then the multiplicative armor strip from heat brings that 25 to 12.5 over time. Back to the helmet, dude. The ship vagina, as my friend calls it. Other armor strips would be, where was Fire Blast, so I can see where we left off. Here it is. So, other stuff to strip armor be Open Eyes. This is also a permanent armor strip. Every time it strips enemy's armor, it strips 10% per second when you look at the enemy, and that scales with strength. So if you have 333% strength, then, 334% strength, then in 3 seconds of looking at the enemy, it strips all of their armor. Pillage is a permanent armor strip. It has 25% at base, which means it's kind of hard to get to a full armor strip, but you don't need a full armor strip nowadays anymore. So that can be nice. It also gives you shields back, which is comfy. However, something to note with Pillage is that it cannot strip armor until the enemy has no shield. So if there's a Corpus with armor, it will strip their shields and then it will try to strip their armor. You can't do both at once. Same with Acolytes. So if you take out an Acolyte's shield, then you can strip its armor with Pillage. Then we have Tempest Barrage is an armor strip helmet because it has corrosive. So if you want the full armor strip with Tempest Barrage, you will need Emerald Archon shards if you use it as a helmet. Terrify is a nice armor strip. However, Tempest Barrage, because it's corrosive, it's not a permanent armor strip. Terrify is also not a permanent armor strip. It has a duration based as well as a max count of enemies that it can affect. That being said, those two things rarely have an effect. Like, I've never had a problem with not being able to hit enough enemies or it not lasting long enough. That's literally never been a problem. The main problem with Terrify, other than its not incredible range and crazy energy cost, is that it does not affect Acolytes. Terrify cannot work on Acolytes, whereas most of the other armor strips do. Tempest Barrage also has a bit of a problem like that, since Acolytes and the like can only take 4 corrosive procs. Thero Strike is a permanent armor strip of 50%. It's nice, but it can ragdoll enemies, which tends to be a pain in the ass a lot of the time if you're trying to not ragdoll the enemies away. Shuriken, with the Seeking Shuriken armor, augment can armor strip, though it is also duration based, so it is not permanent. Though I do believe it works on Acolytes. And that is all of the armor strips via the helmet system, I believe. Out of all of those, my favorite is Pillage because it strips armor while also restoring your shields, which means you get armor strip and survivability at the same time. Other than that, there are plenty of abilities on Warframes that strip armor, right? Like augments on Oberon or abilities on like Nyx and stuff, Goss. The main other thing to mention though would be Corrosive Projection. Corrosive Projection is an additive amount. It makes so enemies have 18% less armor. This is additive to every other armor strip. It just strips 18% of the armor of all enemies in a mission. Which means if you have 328% strength on Pillage, it will strip 82% of enemy armor. But they already have 18% stripped from Corrosive Projection, because it doesn't reduce their max armor, it strips their armor. Which means Corrosive Projection plus 328% strength on Pillage results in a full armor strip, whereas normally without Corrosive it would take 400%. That also means Corrosive Projection plus Fire Blast will result in a 93% armor strip on the enemy, which then the remaining 7%, if all the heat procs happen, will then go down to 3.5% armor strip. So Fire Blast with Corrosive Projection can actually work decently well. Then as far as pets go for armor strip, the only real armor strip on pets, other than trying to like prime stuff, like, okay, I guess you could go Diriga or Hellstrom, right, which are good things for priming, and puts corrosive on them, but I don't think that's worth it for a wave armor strip. It's just not consistent enough. Other than that, Helios, with its signature weapon, Deconstructor Prime, only Helios can use it, and is the only melee mod taking Sentinel weapon. You can then put on your Helios the Vicious Bond, where companion melee attacks strip 15% of enemy armor, and enemies recently damaged by abilities spread the effect to other enemies in a 9-meter radius. So if you're using abilities and you like get enemies close enough together to like group them, and this guy hits everything, you can strip armor actually fairly consistently with Helios, which is something I never see people use. I do actually use it a lot when I'm on Wisp specifically. I need another drink, dude. Sorry if my voice is rough. I have a sore throat. I've been sick for like 3 weeks now. Okay. That's it for armor strip. On to the next. The next topic of build crafting discussion would be... We already covered armor strip. We already covered grouping. We already covered survivability. So next we have damage and crowd control. We'll do crowd control because that's going to take me like 5 minutes. Crowd control is super straightforward. Crowd control effects would be anything that confuses the enemy, stuns the enemy, freezes the enemy, anything like that. Like radiation procs confuse the enemy, frost stuns or freezes the enemy at max stacks, or cold procs, I mean. Cold slows them before being at max stacks. Nyx confuses enemies. Anything like that is a crowd control effect. And the main goal of them is to keep enemies from attacking you or objectives. Now, those effects do not work on overguarded enemies, okay? So Eximus units, it will work on them when their overguard is gone. So if you strip all of their overguard, the Eximus then can be affected by crowd control. The only source of pseudo crowd control that works in this game on Eximus, to my knowledge still, would be Silence from Banshee, which is her helmet, so you can put it on any frame. Silence will prevent any Eximus unit from using their abilities, right? So like the green light bulbs of death, they don't work. The fire blasts, they don't work. Energy vampire doesn't work. This disables all of the Eximus's abilities. So this is very, very nice. I love Silence. It also works on Acolytes, so the Acolyte that has Silence, if you have higher range than base, you can silence the Acolyte from using Silence on you, so it doesn't cancel your abilities. So that's pretty funny. Uno reverse card in Warframe. That's literally crowd control. It's so straightforward. It can be very nice. So that just leaves damage, okay? The last thing you need to know about is damage. And to that, or with that, also comes different effects from statuses. So there are different types of damage. I'm not going to go over in this video how damage calculation works. But damage, well, actually, you know what? I think I'll just wait and cover all of the damage stuff in its own video with the statuses since they're so closely related. You know what? Yes. So that's it for this video then. We went over most of the remaining stuff. There's just going to be one more video after this to cover how damage and status effects work in the game. I will hopefully get to recording that soon, but my throat is fucking killing me right now, so it's not going to be right after this. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe. Adios.